Hi there, Glocal citizens. Welcome back to the podcast that inspires a borderless mindset around manifesting a new world. I am your host, Florence Adu, coming to you from actually my own neighborhood. Can you imagine? I found a guest that lives literally in walking distance and I love it. I've had such an easy, smooth morning getting here. And I think you're gonna really enjoy this conversation. So my guest was raised between the alternate realities of Ghana and Britain. He is passionately curious about music, African culture, and counterculture. Through almost 2 decades of lecturing, researching, public speaking, developing creative projects, curating music, and freelance writing, he has championed arts and culture. He has explored this idea in settings ranging from classrooms to international conferences and in numerous workshops, panels, podcasts, publications, and dance floors. Along the way, he has been profiled by platforms like the BBC, written for others like The Guardian, received a Miles Moreland African Writers Scholarship and Danita funding for a PhD in research on Ghana's alternative music scene. In doing these things, he is creating pathways for young African creatives, cultural practitioners, and journalists to follow. Kobina and Ankomah Graham. Kobby.
Hi.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very, very much.
Okay, so let's jump right into it.
Okay.
Where are you from? Where are you local? And what is your craft?
Okay, so I am from, technically, Koforidua, which is the capital of the eastern region of Ghana. Mm-hmm. And that's because I'm Akan, and we are matrilineal people. Mm-hmm. And so I come from where my mother is from. Mm-hmm. But in terms of where they say it ain't where you're from, it's where you're at. And so in that sense, I'm also from Cape Coast, because when I first moved to Ghana in 1987, that's where I lived with my grandmother. It's where I learned Fanti. Mm-hmm. Which is the only Ghanaian language that I speak, aside from Pidgin English, which is a Ghanaian language.
Yeah.
And I'm from London also, in the sense that I was born in London.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And spent part of my childhood there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where in London?
So I was born in Kentish Town, Royal Free Hospital, lived in Tufnell Park, and went to school in Gospel Oak and played on Hampstead Heath.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The Gospel Oak is walking distance from Hampstead Heath, so we just go there all the time to play, to swim, all these things.
Okay. Oh, I'm familiar with Hampstead Heath.
Okay.
I've never heard of
Gospel Oak.
Gospel Oak.
Yeah, Gospel Oak, it's literally the next stop on one of the lines. So I went to Gospel Oak Primary School before moving to Ghana and finishing primary school in University Primary Cape Coast.
Okay. What is your craft?
So I am a teacher. Some would describe that as a lecturer, because I teach mainly at university level, but not exclusively. I am a writer. So I do freelance writing, and I'm in the process of writing a book. And I am a DJ, and I've been DJing for close to 20 plus years. Yeah, so those are my main things. I'm also a PhD student at the moment. So besides being a teacher, I'm also a student. I'm studying sociology at the University of Ghana. Yep. Okay.
So on your website, you're listed first. And I think even the first image, the first image I don't think is you DJing, but you said you have DJ, then lecturer, then cultural writer and researcher.
Yes.
So I asked that because, is that because music is closest to your heart? Is it because you've been doing it the longest? Tell us a little bit more about that.
So it's funny. If you visit my website once every, let's say, quarter or so, you'll notice that the order changes.
Really?
Yeah, I actually go and change it. And so depending on kind of how I'm feeling, what is the main thing at the moment.
Okay.
And so sometimes I think I'm more of a writer than anything else. Right now, as we're speaking, I feel like I'm more of a DJ than anything else.
Okay.
We've recently revived a DJ format that used to run between 2007 and 2011. So we were running this format called Soul in Motion.
Okay.
And that's where I would DJ I think it was once a month actually. And all these people come down and we
Where
play.
was it?
It was in Osu. There was a place called Rima's Bar. I
remember.
There. Yeah, and we used to go and we'd play neo soul, Afrobeat before, because this was pre-Afrobeats.
Right.
Yeah. So we play Afrobeat, we play broken beat, old school hip hop, R&B.
Okay.
And it was a vibe. And we recently resurrected it.
Yeah.
At the Mix, also in Osu, coincidentally.
Yeah.
And it's been running now for 2 weeks.
Yep.
And we've been doing a lot of planning and playing and stuff. So DJing is what is giving me life right now.
Okay. Nice.
But I think of myself as a cultural practitioner in the sense that I am just very active in the cultural scene. I try and stay on top of what is going on. A lot of younger creatives call on me and ask for advice and assistance. And I just try and I see the creative scene in Accra's community. And so I try as much as I can to be of service.
Interesting you say that, number one, because what you didn't add is actor. Okay, folks.
You are uniquely qualified to speak to this.
Yes. So a little bit of background. So here, my work, obviously creating content, and we did a pilot episode of a program called the Mofa Channel, which you can see, you can watch, you can actually see Kobby on Amazon Prime. So Mofa Channel, Amazon Prime, it'll be in the show notes. And he was a father.
Yes.
That was to our sci-fi eco superhero.
Yes.
Yeah. That was some fun.
Yes, that's I mean, aside from school plays, that's the only acting experience I have, and that was really, it was a lot of fun. I remember getting to understand how many reshoots that actors had. So it's like, say this line, okay, say it again, say it in this way, and then going to the different places.
Locations.
That was a lot of fun actually. Yeah, very unique. And I think I have actually put that on my website.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Good.
I think. Of course, I don't have an extensive acting repertoire, but
but it's listed.
It's there.
Okay, good. Okay, good. So, Mofa Channel, folks, you can see not a cameo. He is one of the lead characters.
Yes,
exactly. Okay, so acting and so creative culture is what's giving you life generally. Yeah. And so, from being a DJ, moving back, being a DJ, and so I'm thinking that probably wasn't your primary occupation when you first came back. No. So I think this is a good time to ask why the where. So how did you come to be living and working and playing back here in Ghana?
Okay. So I was born in the UK and stayed there until I was around 8. Then went to Cape Coast. Okay. Lived with my grandmother. So I finished primary school there and most of secondary school. And then I went back to the UK when I was maybe 17. Okay. And
so what's that, like O-levels time?
So I'd finished O-levels, went back and did A-levels.
A-levels there, okay.
And then I did a first degree and a second degree. Now, around the time that I finished, I think it was maybe my first degree. Okay. Actually, no. Around the time I finished my second degree, 9/11 happened. And the world kind of just shrunk in a sense in terms of opportunities. I remember qualifying and just not finding work. So that was happening. And my parents divorced when I was quite young. And he moved to Ghana and never went back. Okay. And so for years, my father would tell me, nothing will happen for you in the UK. You have to come home. Oh, okay. So there was that. And then when I was in secondary school here, my father had other kids. So these were my younger siblings. And by the time I came back, they were a bit older. They were teenagers.
Right, you could relate.
Like yeah, and like I'd come for holidays and we just really bond. And I'm a firstborn. Oh, okay. And so I felt very responsible and I felt like they needed me. And so there were kind of push factors and then pull factors. Okay. But yeah, so the job situation kind of pushed me away from there. It's one of the things. But then another thing that pushed me away from there was the UK was just a very dark place at the time. I feel like knife crime was on the up, the killing of Damilola Taylor, Stephen Lawrence before that, the rise of like racism and the right wing. These were all things that were happening at the time. And I had started to think about things like where I wanted to live, where I wanted to have family, that kind of thing. And so all these things came together, a perfect storm. And I got an opportunity, an internship that brought me here. And I used that as a test. So I was here, it was supposed to be 3 months. It ended up being 4 months. And afterwards, I went back to the UK and I packed my things and I moved.
Okay.
And 17 years later, I'm still here.
Okay. Alrighty then. So given what you studied, so was it in what you studied? How does that
really
gel?
So my first degree was a law degree. I studied law, University of London. And then for my master's, also University of London, School of Oriental and African Studies, I studied international studies and diplomacy.
Oh, okay.
So one would think that I would either go into law or diplomacy.
Right.
I did some immigration paralegal work because I did get into law school because, you know, you do the law degree and then you go to law school afterwards. Right. I got into College of Law, but by then I knew I didn't want to be a lawyer. Right. It just didn't grab me, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And I went to work for a magazine for a year. And it was the first place where I felt useful because I had all this kind of pop culture knowledge that was otherwise useless. But it was useful at that magazine, and that introduced me to the person who would teach me to DJ. It introduced me to that kind of cultural world. Yeah. And so got a job as a paralegal with an immigration law firm that used to represent people who were fleeing persecution from the Horn of Africa and North Africa and the Middle East. Okay. And it was very kind of soul-destroying work.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah. But then I saw this internship opportunity. It was the University of Sussex. They have something called the Migration DRC, which is the Center for kind of migration research. And they had partner organizations across the world. And so they were doing an internship where you get to go to one of their partner organizations. Okay. And one of those was the Institute of Statistical, Social, and Economic Research at the University of Ghana. And so they could offer the internship. I think they paid for the ticket.
Oh, okay.
I think so.
Yeah.
But you had to sort yourself out.
Right.
And because my father was here, so I came. And so I did that together with Professor John Anafi. I designed this questionnaire around refugees from Liberia who were in the Buduburam camp here in Accra, on the outskirts. Yeah,
and that's the one on the way to Winneba.
Yes, exactly. And so the idea was we were doing research to find out how Ghanaian residents and Liberian residents in Buduburam were getting along. Yeah, and so it was my first time doing that kind of research. I got to supervise a team of, I can't remember how many, but there were so many researchers.
Right, because you were engaging.
Exactly. Right. And so we all hit the field. So I got to design the questionnaire, everything. Yeah. We hit the field, we interviewed all these people, and then we generated a paper that I actually got
all in 4 months?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
I actually went to present the paper at the International Association of Forced Migration Studies conference in Canada. Yeah, so it was great. It was a really cool opportunity. Professor Nafi was really helpful. He was the one. I had actually returned to the UK after the 4 months, and he called me and said, so there's the opportunity to give a talk on the paper. You were the one who did most of the work. Do you want to go? I was like, free trip to Canada. Hell yeah. Right. So that's how I ended up going there. And so it was just testing grounds. And so when I came, I was living with my dad, and my dad worked so he used to work in the Bank of Ghana, and then he went to work for the IMF. And then when he moved back from working for the IMF in kind of Malawi, Ethiopia, Tanzania, he set up a kind of construction business.
Oh, okay.
But he did kind of like imports and exports of just random things. My dad is a hustler.
Okay.
Most of the men in my family are hustlers,
Sure.
like entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And I think I'm the black sheep of the family because I'm an academic.
Okay.
Like, we are not academics. But my father's oldest brother was an academic. And so I feel like every generation produces one.
Sure. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So my dad, one of the things he imported was a bunch of surveillance equipment. And so he set up a small company around it that wasn't doing very well. And he was like, come home and run this company. And it was like 3 guys who would install security systems, and he wanted us to make it work.
Sure.
I did not have a business bone in my body. And I came back and I ran it into the ground. Well.
Oh, you were one of those.
Oh, I'm one of those, totally. Like, I came in thinking, Ghana, okay, fine. I'm going to bring my kind of UK mindset.
Right.
I'm not going to pay bribes in order to get paid for contracts or to get contracts.
Oh, yeah.
All these things. I ran that into 7 feet deep into the ground. Yeah. And it taught me that I'm not great at business, but it introduced me to one of our clients was Casa Preco.
Okay.
We installed we had some good clients.
Sure.
And one of the directors there had a company that did 2 things, market research and media monitoring.
Sure.
They were, I think, maybe the first media monitoring company in Ghana. And he saw my CV and he was like, I want you to run the market research side of the company.
Sure.
It's like, I don't have any market research. He's like, we'll fly you to Kenya to train you.
Oh, wow.
So he flew me to Kenya. I was there for like a week or 2.
Okay.
And I came back and I had to run this company.
Okay. And you didn't run this one to the ground.
I didn't run it to the ground. They moved me at some point from head of research to business development.
Okay.
And then at some point I had to see one of their clients and renegotiate their contract with that client.
Sure.
That client ended up being Joy FM.
Oh, okay.
And Joy FM were like, do you have any experience in radio?
Right.
And on the side, I had already started doing a radio show with, so when I arrived, there was an event that I went to. And I remember walking into the event and they were playing music by Jay Dilla, who I was obsessed with, but who I just never heard in a Ghanaian context. And so I met up with the DJ and his name was Kwekwa Nancy. And he had a radio show on Vibe FM, or was Vibe FM at the time.
Okay.
And he invited me to do a guest set. I did. And afterwards he was like, so see you next week. And I just became co-host with him.
Nice.
So at that point where I met the Joy FM guy, I had been DJing on radio, just late night slots, doing alternative music for almost a year. And so I said yes. And he said, I'll give you a call. He gave me a call. I ended up going to Joy FM.
Okay.
Joined as a journalist.
Okay.
And
so were you, I mean, I guess studying law, you were a writer already.
I guess.
Yeah.
I think I've been writing since I was in secondary school.
Okay. So it's one of your passions.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Definitely. So writing, that's where it comes from. And it was particularly useful at Joy because I was a journalist.
Right.
And so even though it's radio journalism, it's written copy.
Sure. Right. And it's...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I got to do...
So now, as a journalist, did you go out? Were you man on the street at all?
Yes.
So you covered events. You would have to come up with questions to ask at the presidential press conferences.
So yes, I did all of those things. I wasn't assigned to anything presidential.
Okay.
I think I was a bit of an oddball in the newsroom because I think at the time most people were either very kind of politics focused or entertainment focused, but not alternative culture focused. It just wasn't really there.
Right.
And so at the time, and if you look at my CV now, you'll see that there's a lot of kind of, this is the official thing that I'm doing. But at some point in time, I had to expand my hobbies section because a lot of the things that I do, that's where it goes.
Right.
And so I no longer call it hobbies. I one day did an exercise where I said, let me do selected cultural and creative activities that I get up to. And just one-liners. I filled up an A4 sheet real quick. And I realized that I have to put that in my CV because I spend a lot of time on that. While I was at Joy, the person I was dating at the time, who dated like separate, but we remained business partners.
Sure.
We did a magazine called Dust.
Oh, okay. I remember Dust.
Yeah. So
that's right.
We created Dust magazine.
Yeah.
Dust it was like our love letter to Accra. And
it is dusty.
Yes. The idea was actually what name could we come up with that was representative, that was inclusive. And we thought of Dust because it's the common denominator. We used to say you'd find it everywhere from the bottom of a poor person's feet to the top shelf in the penthouse suite. There's dust everywhere. And so it was us just curating Accra at a time where Accra was not the Accra that it is now.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. And so there were a number of people who were doing cultural events, but like, we didn't used to compete with each other. We would all go to each other's events because it was like one event every month or two.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and so we would curate these and we'd write these thought pieces. And we just thought that as far as magazines went, the magazines that we could see either just had all these like really shiny photos. Like at events,
ovation, basically.
Or so they were really well designed, but there wasn't really any kind of like substance. Or they were like these think piece heavy magazines, but they were just so poorly designed. And we were just like, no, we can do both. It can look good, it can have depth, and it can have culture. And so that's what Dust was. So by the time I was working at Joy, I was also the editor of Dust.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. And then I got invited to give a talk at a school. And I went up to Ashesi University.
Okay.
Gave a
so that was
lecture.
The school you were invited to give a talk.
Yes.
And this was early days of Ashesi, right?
Not well, kind of. So they had just moved from. They used to be in Laboni.
Okay. Before
in Central Accra,
campus.
before they moved to their campus in Berikuso.
Yeah.
So I was essentially with them as they moved to Berikuso.
Right.
The year they opened at Berikuso, I was one of the teachers there.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And so I ended up teaching there, and the course that I taught brought together all the other things that I'd done, because it was called Text and Meaning. And the basic idea was it was an introduction to critical theory. So you can take anything and look at it through the lens of Marxism, feminism, like all these different things. And so that's what I would teach. And so we would take any text. It could be a textbook, it could be literature, it could be poems, it could be an advert, a music video, song lyrics. And it was our job to teach students how to read between the lines.
So did you come up with that concept yourself?
No.
Okay,
that was a course.
Part of their philosophical, I guess, plan for their students.
Yes, definitely. Because Ashesi it's inspired by the liberal arts format.
Right.
So even though the degrees that are offered there aren't liberal arts in the sense that they're kind of science and business and management and engineering, every student who is there has the benefit of this education where they get to study some Afrikaners, they all learn about communication, and they all learn critical thinking.
And they all do a service project too.
Exactly.
Which is also,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I was part of the team who were responsible for teaching those subjects.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would teach text and meaning, that particular course. I would teach written and oral communication.
Okay.
And then I ended up teaching a number of humanities courses, African philosophical thought, which is my favorite thing to teach, because it's the course that students call me years after the fact to thank me for to date.
Right.
Because there's something that comes alive in an African student when you teach them that not only were their ancestors not idiots, but there's a line of Black thinking that goes from African tradition all the way into Pan-Africanism, all the way into the freedom struggle and the US Civil rights movement,
Right.
all the way up to Afrofuturism and Afropolitanism and all of these things. And we'd look at it as one continuous thing. It was awesome.
Yeah. So I can imagine that it was an awesome. So where is that course now, if it even exists? And tell us some of your favorite readings from that course.
Okay. So I don't think Ashesi offer it anymore. I was at Ashesi for about 8 years.
Okay.
And then I moved to Webster University in East Legon. And Webster have something called the Cornerstone Seminar that's compulsory for all first-year students.
Okay.
And so I teach this as part of that. So I do an introduction. I call it Introduction to African Social Thought.
Sure.
Introduction to African Social Theory, but it's basically a combination of social theory, history, African philosophy, all of these things. And some of my favorite readings, let's see, I would say a speech by Malcolm X that they had to read on Pan-Africanism, for example, as part of that. And what we would do is we would combine, so it wouldn't just be readings, but it would also be viewings. Every week they have to watch a documentary, and then there are readings that they also have to do.
Sure.
Okay, so one book that we used for this course was Homegoing by Yajisi, which is a really interesting book that it basically traces two sisters, one of whom stays on the African continent, and the other, she's married to a colonizer. And so her children end up in the new world of the West.
Yeah.
Whereas the other sister, her children stay on the continent. And so this plot device allows Yajisi to explore
both sides.
Yeah. And so it goes into kind of the African American experience and the African experience. And so we use that book particularly when we're teaching about kind of the freedom struggle and the civil rights movement, because what you'll find is people often teach maybe US civil rights, or they teach Pan-Africanism and the freedom struggle, but they don't teach these things in tandem because they were happening at the same time. Nkrumah invited Martin Luther King to Ghana's independence. Martin Luther King, I believe, was also at Nigeria's independence.
Right.
These were people who were in the struggle together. If you look at early Pan-Africanism, a lot of the people were not Africans from the continent. Some of the earliest people, Marcus Garvey, etc., these were people whose ancestors had been sold into slavery. And so it was a collective work of blackness in the world that resulted not just in the US civil rights movement, but in the Pan-African movement and these things fit together.
Yep.
And people don't often teach these things together, but we would make it a point to do so. And it helps it come alive for students, because when you're teaching African students, you could choose to teach African students about all the isms. Religious fundamentalism, Marxism, feminism, socialism, capitalism, all these things.
Yeah.
But so many of those things don't seem like they don't come alive for the students as much if you don't ground them. And so when we were talking about like socialism, we teach about African socialism and the fact that this was something that founding fathers of a lot of these nations believed in and used as an economic model because it was based on African communalism before it. We have always been more community focused than individualistic. And so as these nations were being founded, there were attempts to try and find economic models that reflected that. You see, for better or for worse. And so teaching these things together, or looking at the fact that like when you talk about someone who's a Pan-African, you're not just talking about like Thomas Sankara or Patrice Lumumba, you're also talking about Malcolm X, he stated that he's a Pan-Africanist and he would, or W.B. Du Bois, who moved to Ghana. He was here with the Nkrumah administration, etc.
So I feel like particularly African students, they're not necessarily getting that now. So I feel like there's this deficit of that self-awareness that is why we are to some extent where we are now. And so as you're now educating students, and I'm sure most of your students at Webster are not African.
No, they're African.
They're mostly African.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're mostly African. There are students who visit.
Okay.
As well.
Okay, but it's a local.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely.
Or regional, or okay.
So you have Ghanaian students, and then you have students from the sub-region and the region.
Sure.
Yeah. So similar to Ashesi in that way.
Okay.
They're both schools that have primarily Ghanaian students, and then you'll see students coming in from across the continent. With Webster, I found that there are more, let's say, francophone students than I've found in Ashesi. Yeah, and then you'd have visiting students coming from the States, just like a smidgen of those.
Sure. Yeah. Fascinating. So basically, just to kind of wrap the why, the where, you found yourself disillusioned by the West.
Yes.
Yes. To say the least.
I didn't think it was a place to settle.
Sure. Yeah. And then you found your feet, you know, just kind of moving through. And I think that the way that you found your way is so Ghanaian. You know, it's so like, let me try this one and then try this one. And, you know, when you were speaking about how the creative community used to be a bit different, because when I first moved here, that was my experience. It was like, we all go to the same things. I met a lot of the people who were just kind of pillars in the creative space who I don't see that much anymore, partially because life changes. Like people start families. Right, real. Exactly. Yeah. But it's interesting now to see that and how that flows into the work that you have now decided and determined is what you are doing.
Yes.
And so I want to talk about that. But before that, I want to get a little bit more local.
Okay.
Because we're talking about writing and reading and all of that.
Yes.
So I want to ask you about Glocal Speak. So since you've been back, these 17 years, you've seen the lingo on the road change and what have you. So what would you describe as your Glocal Speak? So we want to hear what you hear. So a word, a phrase, or a saying that is a meaningful part of your local experience, and how or why you've come to value it as Glocal Speak.
Okay, so I'm going to have to delve into Pidgin.
Okay.
Yeah, for this.
Okay.
And I'll give a little bit of context.
Yes.
Typically speaking, people often think of Pidgin English here in Ghana as being broken English. That's what people in schools still call it broken English. And you're discouraged from speaking Pidgin English in school because they say it makes your Queen's English not so good. But the way that I look at it is that Pidgin English is the actual only Ghanaian language, because all other Ghanaian languages predate Ghana. The only language that has really come together and is a melting pot for phrases from all the different languages is Pidgin.
Sure.
And language is supposed to be dynamic. It's supposed to reflect changes in culture. But what words has Ghana contributed to the English language? The English language has new words added every year. Right now, if you're playing Scrabble, you could drop bootylicious and win. It's an actual word. Bling has been officially added to every year. There are new words that they add. Selfie, etc., etc. every year.
Right.
How many of those words have been introduced by Ghana? Not many. But if you listen to Pidgin English, you will find that Pidgin English is dynamic and changing all the time. And it's the lingua franca of like many of the secondary schools, particularly the boys' schools, but increasingly the girls' schools as well.
Right.
But what is happening is, so I'm 45, this year I'll be 46. I have younger siblings who are a decade younger than me. And so these are the siblings for whom I moved back.
Yes.
And so in school, so I would say something like, oh, this thing, it'd be yawa. And yawa means a thing is rubbish, it's crap, right?
Yeah.
No, actually, no, I get it wrong. I would say that thing, it'd be deft.
So now they say yawa.
Now they say yawa. And the interesting
so what was deft?
Deft means yawa. It's exactly the same.
But where did that come from?
I don't know. But I know that so like this is like early 90s and Van Spim in Cape Coast.
Sure.
To say that something was rubbish, it was trash, we would say that thing would be deft.
Okay.
Then my younger siblings would come home from secondary school and they'd be saying, oh, that thing would be yawa. And so when they explained it to me, I was like, wow. And what I realized is the big difference culturally between my time and their time is that there was an influx of Nigerian movies and Nigerian music and culture.
Right.
And so that introduces more Hausa.
Yes, because Yawa is a Hausa.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so for me, I would use a word like Yawa.
Yes.
Now.
Right.
These days people say, oh, that thing is trash, right? Okay. But basically in Pidgin, you'd say that thing be Yawa, or some Yawa has happened to you, or something like that.
Right.
And I think that's so beautiful because it reflects how the language is growing and changing. It's a living, breathing organism.
Yeah.
And I can't say the same for English for Ghanaians. We learn English and it's there, and it's like some spirit that you worship and you don't touch. But Pidgin, that's where we get dirty.
Right. And so, innovate.
And so that's why I'm choosing the word Yawa.
It's Yawa.
Yeah.
Okay. Because you do hear it. Yeah.
Because Yawa things happen all the time. Like just, you can use it as a phrase to say that thing is rubbish, or you can use it to refer to misfortune that has befallen somebody.
Yes, exactly.
Or just having a bad day. Yeah, and I mean, Ghana is a lovely place, but we're going through some hard times at the moment. It's not the best of times.
Yes.
Although at Christmas, it seems like it's the best of times. 30 December is real. And our branding is impeccable.
Right.
But sometimes Ghana be Yawa. So I choose Yawa.
I have to agree. Sometimes. But we had a great conversation the other day. And so, we were talking and we were at the mix.
Yes.
And I'll tell you, so oftentimes I speak with my listeners and say, oh, it's this weather this season. I will tell you folks, even though it's the hottest time of the season, March, April, I mean, now we're in May and it's the real creep of the long raining season. I would say this is the most beautiful time because of the raining season and because the sky has like character and because the winds move more often. So you won't be sitting in still air. Very rarely will you sit in still air at this time of year. So all that to say that's not Yawa right now.
No, actually, that's very true. And it's actually very important to me as someone who moved from London, that is associated with like gray skies constantly. Whether it's raining or not, the skies are almost constantly gray.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
And so in the UK, we had like this negative association with like rain and gray skies. And I knew I had really reacclimatized to Ghana when I moved here. And there was a point in time where I look up in the morning and it's gray skies and I'm just like, it's gonna rain. And I felt good about it because when it rains here, everything slows down. The temperature drops and it's lovely. Everybody looks forward to the rain. Except when it's like flooding and stuff like that. But in terms of how people feel about rainfall, rain is considered a blessing.
Exactly.
And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Okay, well, that's our Glocal experience.
Yes.
Okay, so now speaking about how you are transitioning from transitioning from being a lecturer and being an academic in that regard to being, a PhD that makes you a higher academic.
Yes.
So this actually seems like the great culmination of all the things that you do.
Yeah.
And so tell us how that journey started.
Okay. So I've been DJing, and as a DJ, while I've been DJing, I've been teaching. And first and foremost, I would say I'm a student of culture. I'm obsessed with culture and I love counterculture. And so I've made various observations over time. And I've also, so one observation, for example, was around the 2010s, for example, I noticed as a DJ that globally speaking, or at least in the States in particular, the speed of the music picked up.
Oh, and like so, the speed meaning?
Beats per minute.
Beats, yeah.
So, for example, you'd have something like Usher would be singing nice and slow and confessions, and these are all moving at a very sedate pace.
Sure.
But then around the time that Black Eyed Peas dropped I've Got a Feeling, and everybody was being produced by David Guetta, all of a sudden American R&B started to sound very very
dancey.
Very dancey.
Yeah.
DJ's Got Me Falling in Love Again Oh my gosh, these were songs which were very kind of like thumping, right? And so in Ghana, the music also moved up, and we had Azonto.
Right.
So Azonto music was almost like our dance music, and it moved at that speed. And so these are the kinds of things that I observe as a DJ that I don't necessarily see a lot of people writing about. But I would just make these observations, sometimes put it in a magazine, on my blog, write for somebody, that kind of thing. My mother, my late mother, had been on my case to do a PhD for years because she's an African mother. Yeah. You can do a PhD, do a PhD. And so, but I ran away from doing a PhD for a long time because I didn't think I needed it. Because the other thing was that, like I said, I'm active in the cultural scene.
Sure.
And so it means that I have a lot of contacts in the cultural scene. It means that there are things that I've taken part in and helped kind of co-found and stuff like that. So I have a lot of observations about the scene generally. And so as I was at HSE, there was an opportunity that was brought to my attention, which was that the Copenhagen Business School in Denmark had partnered with the University of Ghana Business School to do research on cultural and creative industries in Ghana, because that research, for the most part, doesn't exist. There is a dearth of research on creativity in Africa.
Sure.
If you look up creative and cultural industries, most of the writing is focused on the West.
Okay.
And you might find writing to do with, let's say, Nigeria, Nollywood and Afrobeats.
Maybe South Africa.
Maybe South Africa, but not much for the rest of the continent at all.
Okay.
And it's important information. I once went to a talk where the former Deputy Minister for Culture was asked the question, what does it look like in a cabinet meeting when you talk about culture? And she made the point that, like, we don't have the stats, we don't have the research, we don't even have the legal instrument. And so she can rely on, it's usually tourism and culture. And so there's a legal instrument for tourism, but there wasn't a legal instrument for culture and the arts. And so, and there's no research. And so in a room full of competing interests, lands, the foreign ministry, etc., they're not going to take you very seriously.
Right.
So this is important research that's needed. And so Copenhagen Business School and University of Ghana joined forces and secured funding from Danida in Denmark to do this research. And so they're looking at film, they're looking at music, they're looking at fashion and the visual arts. And you have postdoctoral students who are working on various projects. Then you have PhD students. They were going to fund 4 PhD students.
Got it.
So I applied under the sociology department because it wasn't just a business school, performing arts and sociology at Legon.
Got it.
And so I am looking at Ghana's alternative music scene. And because I'm looking at it from a sociological perspective, I'm looking at the relationship essentially between music and society. So how are these artists within the alternative music scene, how do they think of themselves as being in community with this idea of Ghana? Ghana as an idea, people talk about the American dream. The Ghanaian dream is 60 years old. We've only been around, so we are still defining it. So what does the alternative scene say about Ghana? When you think about music scenes, for example, you have the mainstream often, and then you have the alternative scene. And the alternative scene tends to be a bit less guided by trends and popularity. And it's more about freedom and expression and freedom to create. And so the sounds tend to be a bit more experimental, or the lyrics tend to be braver. You see, you have that freedom.
There's activism oftentimes.
Exactly. And so I'm interested in that because where there's activism, that suggests a care for society. You see. So I'm looking at that relationship between music and society, between music and identity.
So thinking about education, because, you know, in Western world, there is definitely, and I imagine the outgrowth of this is that there will be a greater emphasis on music education or different kinds of arts education, which we really don't have a really strong foundation for any longer. right, in public school education. So as you're doing research and speaking with the community, how did they even come to be these creatives? Because we all know that it's not necessarily very encouraged to go outside of the box.
Yeah.
They're not going to make any money. And so what are some of the influences that these people are experiencing? Is it Western mostly? Is it in their communities? And then how did they learn these crafts?
So I'm at the point where I'm starting the research now. So, but I've done a lot of kind of just reading of the literature. And then of course I have my community who I follow and speak with all the time, etc. And I think that what you have is you have the kind of independence generation under Kwame Nkrumah, who
it's like our parents.
Yes, exactly. Our parents, our grandparents, who some of them actually received like funding from the state to go and study arts abroad. And so like I interviewed the high life legend Ebbo Taylor. And he talked about getting some funding to go and study the guitar, so there was state funding available even for the arts, and the arts was considered important.
So basically they were recognizing the need and then getting people to train to come back.
Exactly.
Got it.
So, or just encouraging. So, I mean, whenever Nkrumah would travel, he would go with a high life band. So it would be like E.T. Mensah and the Tempos or something. He would take part in state functions. And it was only in the 1970s that under all the military juntas and stuff, that kind of creativity was suppressed. There was literal taxes on like vinyl, importing vinyl. And there was no more nightlife because there were curfews and stuff like that. So a lot of people either went abroad or they stayed, but they went into the villages or into the church. And so you find live music culture in Ghanaian churches is very vibrant. That's where it comes from. And so now in the 1990s, you have this kind of, Ghana becomes a republic again. So it's the fourth republic. You have a constitution now and democracy, etc. And the way you have to look at it is that somebody who is in their early 30s now in Ghana, all they've known is democracy. They've seen ever since the 1992 constitution, they've seen one party pass power to another party, back to another party, back to another party, successive president, elections. So the fear from that time period is gone.
Right.
And so now you have the rise again of a live music scene.
Right.
You see? And so you do have that live music.
Right.
And it's coinciding with a sudden global interest in African culture. Which has been gestating this whole time. And so I think people like Ghanaians, we've always been just global. We absorb influences from everywhere. You give us hip hop, we'll give you hip life. If you give us trap, we'll give you like trap sounding high life, whatever. Now drill is one of the biggest forms of black music in the world. And all of a sudden you have the Asaka Boys, Black Sherif, and it's very drill influenced. Back in the day, it was jazz, and then you had big band high life music. Like whatever influences you give us, we will take it and we will remake it in our image. And so the kids have been doing this, and they do it whether they're in the secondary schools or in the streets. And so amongst those kids, you have the ones who want to be like the big stars. And then you have the ones who they're just really interested in the music. They're not really into being popular. They're just creating to create. And so I think that the kind of like alternative scene has emerged from those people who, the other thing to realize is what is alternative is constantly changing. When hip life started,
it was alternative.
Yeah. This is something I was told by Mensah, who has been in the game for a really long time.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and so I would say that it's young Ghanaians who are connected to the world, be it through TV, radio, relatives, whatever. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, you go to any kid in the street and they know what the hottest songs are, you see. And I think they absorb these influences. They're not encouraged by school to express their creativity, but in the spaces in between. So it's like, so out of class, then we get to form a rap group.
Sure.
Or we do this. It's the kids.
Right.
The kids are really creative, and Africa is the continent that has the most young people in the world.
Exactly.
If we could find a way to make creativity pay for young people.
Exactly.
We would solve so many problems economically speaking on the continent.
Right. And socially speaking. And
that's the thing. Yeah. And one thing that I love right now is that with all this talk about Afrobeats and stuff, there's attention not just on the rest of the world looks at Afrobeats as, oh, okay, young, hot African music.
Yeah.
But along with that is being pulled, the alternative artists are being pulled along as well. And so right now, one of the most successful Ghanaian artists, globally speaking, right now is probably Amare. Amare, you call her Afrobeats, but she does whatever she wants, musically speaking. Nigeria, Thames. Yeah. Everybody talks about Thames. Thames, strictly speaking, is not an Afrobeats artist.
Yeah, no, she's just an artist.
She's an artist, and she will flirt with any genre.
Right.
She's always been a lot more experimental.
Right.
She's been pulled along. Even if you look at Black Sherif, who I think literally last week won, or earlier this week, won Artist of the Year at the Ghana Music Awards.
Yeah.
If you listen to his album, it doesn't sound like he's following any trend.
Sure.
He sounds very original. He's singing about feelings in a way that Sarkodie might talk about his feelings, but
not really. Yeah,
he's trying to ball. It's like cigars and rollies.
Right. That's going to do it for part 1 of my conversation with Kobby Graham. Next week, join us for part 2, where Kobby tells us a lot more about the intricacies of being a cultural practitioner and so much more. He has a wealth of different interests around reading and listening and watching, which you'll be treated to so much. And as always, you can catch us with new episodes Tuesdays at glocalcitizenspod.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Please do like, share, subscribe, tell a friend. It helps others find great content online. Leave us a review if you're on Spotify, if you're on Google, if you're on Apple, leave us a review. It really helps. And in case you're in the Accra metropolitan area on a Sunday afternoon, do check out Kobby at the Mix restaurant for Soul in Motion Sundays. So Sunday brunch from 11 to 6 at the rooftop restaurant, The Mix, which is in Osu. Check out Kobby and his crew with Soul in Motion. And until next time, bye for now.